Philadelphia, San Jose, or DC, Los Angeles Galaxy,
Pitch Pass,
Colorado Rapids, Vancouver Whitecaps, Seattle Sounders, Montreal Impact, Plus USA, New York Red Bulls.
Pitch Pass, your all-access credential to the people that matter in MLS. Here's your host, Greg Roach.
2014 is here, and the 2014 MLS season is right around the corner. So we need to kick off the new season of Pitch Pass. Thank you so much for downloading this first episode of the year. Perfect time to do it with MLS SuperDraft 2014 happening this week. I don't know about you, but I don't really know much about college soccer. I know a man who does, though, and he writes for TopDrawerSoccer.com. Travis Clark will join us in just a minute. We also have Kyle McCarthy, who writes for basically any soccer-related outlet you can think of. He's writing for them. MLS, Fox Soccer, the Boston Herald. It goes on and on and on. We're going to talk to him about some of the league issues that have come up, not only in the last few weeks, but in the last couple of days, especially concerning Don Garber's comments in between rounds of the MLS SuperDraft. But like I said, we'll kick off the show with Top Drawer Soccer's Travis Clark. Travis, first of all, welcome to Pitch Pass, and you are very, very lucky. You are the first guest of the new season of Pitch Pass. So congratulations on that.
I'm very honored, and thanks for having me on.
Perfect time to have you on, as you are the aficionado on all things college soccer, and with the MLS SuperDraft happening and now complete, at least the first two rounds. I wanted to get your take because I think I speak as a typical MLS fan, in that when I focus on college soccer players is this time of year when the MLS SuperDraft is happening. And I guess I just thinking to myself, will there ever be a situation where the MLS SuperDraft is as well known or as broken down as, say, the NFL draft?
I don't necessarily think that that's an evolution that the draft will ever take in Major League Soccer, simply because teams are placing an emphasis on developing their own players. As you've seen, DC United has signed, I believe, 7 or 8 homegrown players, some who have gone to college, some who haven't. So, with that in mind, a lot of the best talent out there is already being identified. And even if players play a year or two in college, they can be signed by MLS teams and removing them out of the draft pool. We've seen the same thing this year with several of the best players kind of in college soccer sign with teams that they're affiliated with through the MLS homegrown rules. So instead of being available for the draft, they instead enter, sign directly with the team in MLS. So that kind of changes the dynamic of it, and I think that will also limit it from eventually becoming the same sort of thing.
Well, and that brings up another point that I was just thinking about as I was watching the draft take place, and that is the academies. You would hope that the net for these teams would become bigger and bigger as far as where they can draw players from. And then I think to myself, but at the end of the day, there are still this is a huge country. This isn't like, say, the Netherlands or England, where every area has a big-time soccer team in its backyard that they can then pull for youths from for academy development. So where are we? How far are we away from the expansion of the MLS academy territories and the maybe upper echelon, the upper 10% of college players really not even being eligible for the draft because they're all homegrown products?
Yeah, that's really hard to quantify, simply because of the number of players that are out there and the vast uncharted territories that they have. You've seen teams reach out into different areas of the country and develop affiliate programs, but they're still limited in terms of by the MLS rules, in terms of who they can sign and where, and how many out of territory quote unquote exemptions that there are. So when you look at it, it's going to take a while, and everything's got to keep on improving, and in terms of development and coaching and identification, there's still so much to do. So it's really hard to say. Hopefully within the next 5-10 years things continue to improve. There's a place for 18 to 22-year-olds to play, not just college soccer, but within a professional environment or what have you, in order just to keep raising the game and pushing it to a new level. Everything's getting better, but is it getting better in the right way? Is it getting better sort of over the right time? So youth soccer and youth development is such an amalgamation and a confusing thing that it's hard to know when you could say that things have turned a corner, quote unquote. But it is getting better, and as we've seen with the amount of homegrown players signed, teams are working hard at it and teams are investing in it.
Yeah, let's circle back to the homegrown signings, the recent ones, in just a second. I did want to get your gauge, though, your overall view of here's the typical question coming. You ready, Travis? The winners and losers of the first two rounds of the MLS SuperDraft. Give us a couple teams that you thought did well and a couple teams that you thought maybe dropped the ball a bit.
Yeah, the two teams that jump out to me, and obviously when you're quantifying that, it's like, well, I mean, you're never really going to know about this draft for the next couple of years. I think Philadelphia did pretty well. They brought in Andre Blake, obviously number one overall. And while that, from the sense of you already have Zach McMath, it's perplexing. He was pretty clearly the best kind of talent available. They landed some other interesting pieces. Pedro Ribeiro from Coastal Carolina, who slipped a little bit. And then you're looking at Kevin Cope, a defender from Michigan State, that could come pretty good. He's a pretty solid center back. The New England Revolution brought in two D.C. area attacking talents in Patrick Mullins and Steve Newman. And I think that the odds are that at least one of them will come good and make an impact in MLS, if not both of them. So those are two guys who I think can give the Revolution something extra in 2014. And then, on the other side of things, Seattle, I feel like, could have done a little bit better. They only had a couple of picks, but they both went with center backs when in my opinion, there were better center backs possibly available to them. Vancouver took some risks with their picks, but also, they rolled the dice with a couple of talented guys in the top 10 in the Jamaican midfielder Andre Lewis that was an invite to the Combine, and also Christian Dean. Now a couple years from now, both could be starters in MLS, and I would eat my own words, but at the same time, they didn't get a couple of players who could help them. I did like their second-round pick of Mamadou Diop. I think he'll give them something this year, but both those Cascadia teams left me a little bit wanting.
You understand why the Union traded up from 2 to 1 because they had their eye on Andre Blake, and a couple other teams were also trying to get to the number one pick from DC United. I'm just trying to think to myself, what is the best case scenario with the Union goalkeeping situation? Is it Zach McMath? And Hackworth has already come out and said that McMath is the number one starter. Is it that he has a good season and then raises his trade value for the future?
It wouldn't surprise me to see McMath getting traded before that. The salary he has, if he's going to be a backup player. I mean, you have the GA status with Blake, so that gives you a little bit of leeway to kind of have the two compete. But he can. I think Blake could win the starting job this year. So McMath will have to prove himself and have to, raise his game if he wants to keep himself in the Union starting lineup.
It'll be interesting because when Zach McMath came out of Maryland, the thing was this is one of the future of American goalkeepers, and it hasn't worked out that way. And some people will say it's because he hasn't had the competition, and when he did against Mondragon, he didn't win that battle.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can look at it like that way. It's there's the one element to it as well that is a little bit even more confusing. The current Maryland goalkeeper, Zach Steffen, is tied to the Union Academy.
Yeah.
So if the Union obviously aren't expecting to sign him eventually, or maybe, maybe Steffen will go to Europe and they'll look smart with his pick. So it was, when you factor that in and they go out and grab Blake, that it was also pretty confusing. So I think, they're just looking at this like somebody to bring in and compete with McMath. But as you said, that was kind of hit or miss previously. So it's going to be a very, very intriguing sort of progression, if you will.
Yeah, and the one thing I will say in Zach McMath's defense is I think that we as Americans, especially, exclusively for this position, which is goalkeepers. You don't usually see 20, 19, 21-year-old keepers who are really, really good in their leagues. In fact, I'm having trouble thinking of examples where they're excellent. So I think we're a little bit spoiled when we see the Bill Hamids and the Sean Johnsons of the world who just step in and are, if not superstars, but extremely competent as goalkeepers. You don't really see that as keepers in that age.
No, I mean, goalkeepers, some people say that it's the hardest position on the field, and in many ways you can agree because there's only one spot on the field for it, obviously, so the competition is fiercer. You've got a lot of things going on along with shot stopping. And, you could argue that Sean Johnson and Bill Hamid have had their youthful hiccups,
yes,
if you will. So, it's a tough position. When I evaluate prospects, I throw my hands up in the air and say, well, I don't know about goalkeepers as much. So, but I think Blake is legit. He's a real deal if he can establish consistency and continue to mature. But, it's an interesting position to watch, especially when you're looking at young players.
So let me ask you about a couple of players, and I'm saying this as not as somebody who knows everything about the other players that were drafted, but I feel like just gleaning the information that there were a couple of guys who were even under the radar of not soccer followers or college soccer followers, but were surprises in the first round, or maybe even unknown variables that guys like yourself probably know a little more about. And we mentioned this guy earlier was Andre Lewis, who went to Vancouver. What can you tell us about him? What type of player is he, and what can we expect from him?
Yeah, Andre Lewis, MLS has instituted this program where they brought in Caribbean players and ran a Caribbean combine with that eye to take cherry pick a few of those players and then bring them to the MLS combine. So I wasn't at the combine to see him play, but from what I saw, he's a little bit creative, crafty, pretty small midfielder. He's only 5'9", 140 pounds. So, it's unclear where he'll fit. Is he strong enough on the tackle to clean things up in the center of the park? Will he be a D mid? Is he attacking number 10 type? I don't think he's a winger or a wide player by any stretch of the imagination, but I think he makes things tick when he's on the ball. So, what kind of a role we'll see this year is, he'll have to win a starting role. He'll have to win playing time in preseason. So, that's going to be the challenge on him to kind of really show what he can do. He's got experience with the Jamaican youth national team and comes from Harborview FC, which is a club that has been sending sending players to MLS at a relatively steady clip now. So, there's pedigree there in that, but he's still got a lot to prove, obviously.
We talk about, or we hear about over and over again, that if you're a front office and you're finding players exclusively based on the combines, you're probably not. Your scouting department isn't set up correctly. Was Andre Lewis a known quantity before this Caribbean combine and then into the regular MLS combine?
I mean, you'd have to think so, right? Because obviously MLS teams are going to be scouting down there and looking at looking under every stone to find players. So I don't know for sure, but. You have to think that he was on the radar because he was on the national team, and I'm assuming at least some MLS teams are scouting, the U20 competitions that he's in.
Now I'm gonna, the Akindele pick by FC Dallas from Colorado School of Mines is another one that had a lot of people scratching their heads. Did you even see him play at any point? He's a Division II player. I would imagine not.
No, I mean I only found out about him after he was invited to the combine. I talked to people down there. And the thing about him is, he's got a lot of pace, athleticism, kind of some of the tools that MLS teams value on soccer fields. So, he stood out because of that. And then, he's in a draft class that's chock full of center backs and central midfielders. That's, it's kind of a bland, boring approach. So, you kind of factor those things in. He does well at the combine, and, there's buzz. Teams are going to try to, take a shot at this kid. He played Division II soccer, but he scored 76 goals in 4 seasons. So, that's not that bad at all, obviously. So, FC Dallas, there's obviously risk in the pick, but at the same time, from talking to people around here, they didn't really rate the draft pool that highly. So, it wasn't a huge shock to see them end up with Akindele.
The thing I would like to keep an eye on as far as FC Dallas is concerned, obviously Pareja, who is coming from Colorado Rapids, if anybody probably had him on the radar, it would have been Pareja. But to walk in, be hired in, and a few days later have the juice to spend a number 6 pick on a guy that a lot of people don't even know about, it probably says a lot about how much power he's going to wield inside FC Dallas.
Well, I think that a lot of his stuff, they have a technical director in Fernando Clavijo, so this could have been a move that he orchestrated and he was behind because, there was assistant coaches still in place after Schellas left that were doing a bulk of FC Dallas' scouting. So I haven't talked to Brea, don't know what sort of his influence on the pick was, but, there are a lot of moving variables and factors and, opinions that are sourced when these decisions are made. So it would be interesting if Perea came in and said, all right, I want this kid, but at the same time, there was a lot more discussed about it, most likely.
So I wanted to ask you because I hit you up on Twitter asking you the question about Jalen Robinson when he was signed as a homegrown product for DC United, and I asked you where would he have gone in the draft, and you said you actually have him rated higher than Christian Dean at that point, correct?
Yes, that is correct. I think right now I like him better as a player. Dean is obviously built a lot bigger. He's a stronger player. But Jalen's a kind of a freak athlete. He's been on DC's radar for a long time, and he'll come in and probably do pretty well. I wouldn't be surprised to see him get minutes by the end of the season, and provided he makes an adjustment, he'll probably be a firm candidate to start out at Richmond, down with the Kickers. But I think he'll compete with John Franklin for playing time at right back. So, unless DC then thinks that he's still a center back, which, they say he's a freak athlete, you pair him up with your Bobby Boswells, your Jeff Parks, bigger guys who are much more experienced and can kind of help him on the field. Maybe they even throw him in the middle. So, I like him. I think it's exciting to see him sign and be playing in a league with a little more exposure, obviously more than college. So it's a pretty exciting pickup for DC, and just like another first-round pick.
Yeah, and that's kind of got me thinking about the other homegrown products that we have seen signed recently. I have a couple of names I would not throw off you, but based on your impressions, who are some of the homegrown products that you've seen signed in the last month or so that you think could have an impact on their clubs this season?
There's not going to be a ton of players. Names that jump out quickly. Jordan Allen recently signed with Real Salt Lake. He's another pretty exciting talent, U20 national team candidate on the U18 men national team. So he's certainly going to be somebody fighting for minutes at RSL. I was just talking to the RSL guys here about him, and they're obviously pretty excited about him joining and pretty excited about him trying to fight for minutes in camp. The Earthquakes just announced the signing today of Tommy Thompson, the forward from Indiana, and he's a kid who, he's a pretty special talent, really exciting player to watch up front. And while, you look at him and say, are you quite there, quite ready yet? He might not be, but if he earns minutes, he's a player that can, make things happen up front, score some goals, set some goals up, that kind of a thing. Draws rave reviews from the coaches that I've spoken to about him and from when I've seen him. It's not hard to spot his talent. He's a special player, and really excited to see him move up a level.
Yeah, and those were two of the 4 names that I had on this list. So way to knock that out, Travis. Good job. And then the other guy was Harrison Shipp.
Yeah, no, he's a little more of a different case. There's not as much athleticism there. You kind of wonder, are you going to play as an out-and-out and second attacking midfielder? Will they set up the team to play around you? Are you quick enough? So I liked him a lot at the college level, and provided he can adjust and fine-tune his game, cope with the physicality, he'll probably get kicked around a good bit because he's so good on the ball. Provided he can fine-tune and make those adjustments, then he could certainly help the Fire this year as well.
You made mention about the surplus of central defenders, midfielders. So if we rack this draft versus last year's draft, it seemed like there were a lot of guys last year who popped, and a reason a lot of them seemed to pop is because they were in much more creative positions. And I'm thinking about the tandem of Dylan Powers and Deshaun Brown in Colorado. Yeah. Is this draft, will we look back on this draft and say, okay, this was just as good a draft as 2013's, only with a different focus?
I think it could be. I do think that when you're looking at the Rookie of the Year race, I would tend to favor a homegrown player over necessarily a draft pick. But, I think one of Newman or Mullins could end up playing at a much higher level than many people are projecting, and that then people would, will see their attacking talent and be like, oh, well, these guys weren't that bad actually after all. So that should work out pretty well, and I'm optimistic that it'll be sort of the same cycle I feel like we get every year. Every year they're like, oh, this level is just, not great. But it ends up being just pretty much the same thing where you have 5 to 10 players in. Yeah, there's less excitement around the talent, but, if you're a guy play center back for 30-plus games, which you may see, not going to guarantee that, that could end up being sort of the impact player, if you will, instead of like, your Dylan Powers or Deshaun Brown scoring a bunch of goals and doing fun things. You just have a solid and steady, grinded-out defender type who plays a lot of games.
So if there is a team that had a Rabbits-type draft from last year, we're looking at New England. That's the one we got our eye on.
I think so. I think Philly and New England are my top two for sure, just in terms of razzmatazz factor. I like DC got it right with Birnbaum. I thought they were going to go Dean because of GA stuff, but he's a player that I think fans will be happy with, and he can make an impact in 2014, which, when you're picking top 5, top 10 of the draft, impact players are within reach, so that's what you kind of want to get out of them instead of the project types, especially for DC. They've got enough project types in Robinson, Mullins, Colin Martin, that sort of a thing. So they're still a work in progress, but I like what DC did with Birnbaum for sure.
You can read his work at topdrawersoccer.com. Is it Travis M. Clark is your Twitter handle, Travis?
Yeah, you got it.
I knew it. Thank you very much. Travis, thank you very much, man. This is a tough part of the year for me because I'm so unaware of the college soccer players, and thank you very much for coming on, kind of breaking it down for us.
Yeah, no problem. Every fall, you feel free to just give me a call.
Thanks, man.
Yep, have a good one.
Every year I try to add a different part to kind of round out my American soccer experience. Maybe in the fall, I'm not going to promise I'm going to watch a lot of college soccer, but I'm definitely going to try to follow the guys as they're playing, the top players, just to have an idea so I'm not coming in cold to this draft situation with MLS SuperDraft. That's a great guy to follow if you need to do that as well. At Travis M. Clark, again, is his Twitter handle. A guy that knows everything about everything MLS and American soccer is one of my favorite guests to have on. He writes for MLS. He writes for Fox Soccer. He writes for the New England Soccer Journal. He covers the Revs for Boston Herald. He is very, very busy. He's Kyle McCarthy, and he joins us right now on Pitch Pass. Kyle, welcome, my friend.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always a blessing to be here.
A blessing. You're in my hometown, which is also a blessing to be there in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I've managed to get through 2 or 3 days here, and I've yet to have a cheesesteak. So I don't know if I'm failing as a Philadelphia tourist or not, but I'm surviving nonetheless.
I'm going to tell you the unknown or the secret between Philadelphians and the rest of the world. They'll sell you on the cheesesteak, but the true Philadelphia thing that you need to get, which you can just get walking out of your hotel right now, get yourself a soft pretzel. That is, to me, that is quintessentially Philadelphia, not just the cheesesteak.
So that's why the Philadelphia Union serve those pretzels at halftime.
Yes, because you can get a good cheesesteak. Like, you have to look in other cities. You have to look around for a place, but you can find a place in almost every city in America that has a good cheesesteak. Can't say the same thing about the soft pretzel. So make sure you get a soft pretzel before you head back north, all right?
Yep, and I won't stop at Auntie Anne's.
No.
I'll get an actual pretzel.
Yes, please. Well, I wanted to ask you a couple of things about the draft before we get into some of the league stuff that has gone down in the last few weeks. And, we just had Travis Clark on, and he said that the team that could have that Colorado Rapids year, which is the rookies who really pop based on the Super Draft, was your team, New England Revolution. Do you agree with that statement?
I think that is a fair statement. When you look at how the Revs worked the draft board yesterday, they sat at 4 after picking up a pick earlier in the week, and they plucked Steve Newman out of Georgetown, a versatile player capable of slotting in 4 or 5 different spots in their fluid formation. And then they see how the draft's unfolding and the chaos that is just wrestling through the room. And then they move up a spot to make sure they get Patrick Mullins, the Herman Trophy Award winner, who's just a traditional striker. And those two guys have proven themselves as college players. And now the record for forwards transitioning to MLS is a little bit spotty. But in this draft and with the quality of the talent pool, it's tough to go wrong when you plump for established figures.
Yeah, and it's not a situation if you take Mullins at 1 or 2 and he doesn't work out, you're looking like a guy, well, you probably had some other options. When you get Mullins where they got him, it's not found money, but there's really not a lot of pressure as opposed to, say, number 1 overall.
Exactly. It's a situation where he can come in and work himself into the mix. And if he scores a bunch of goals, great. If he turns into the sort of pro where he's in the league 8 to 10 years and scores 5 to 7 goals a year, that's fine too. He doesn't have to be a star when you pick him up at that juncture of the draft, and that's important for him and for the Revolution as they move forward.
I don't want to make the guy out to be a well, you know what? Let me restate that, because here's what I'm thinking. The Revs over the last, 5 or 6 years have been one of those teams that you haven't really had to make time to watch for. Now, obviously, that all changed, especially in the last year and a half, and most especially in the last season. And then you look at the draft and who they picked up, and you think to yourself, well, they're doing well, or they're an exciting team in spite of their owner. Does Kraft get a bad rap, though, just because of the stadium situation? Is he a good owner outside of not paying for a new stadium for the team?
Kraft gets a bad rap because he is not as overt with his emotions and his investment in the team as some other owners in MLS. There are other investor operators who are on Twitter who are extolling the virtues of their side day after day. That's not what Jonathan Kraft and Bob Kraft do. They sit behind the curtain and they invest in the team emotionally, they invest in the team financially, but they don't do it in a way that captures attention. So from a fan's perspective, I can certainly understand the frustration because the top priority is the stadium, and the stadium hasn't happened yet. They've talked about it for years and years, and they haven't been able to seal a deal. The next priority is designated players. They've signed a couple of them, but they've been toward the lower end of the pay scale, and they haven't particularly worked out. And then you go down the line, and all of a sudden, the fact that the Kraft family has invested in MLS since the beginning really doesn't climb up the pecking order, so to speak. So I think they do get a bad rap, but I can certainly understand the frustration that surround how they operate their team.
Yeah, and that's why even as I started to this conversation, I had to draw back because you can't just say that they're bad owners and leave it at that, because as you just said, they have been behind this league since it started.
Yeah, in the way I see it, when a person or a family spends the amount of capital that the Krafts have spent on MLS, there has to be some sort of emotional attachment there. There has to be a belief. People who have that sort of money don't just spend it wantonly. They spend it on things that they believe in and that they want to succeed. And I understand the perception that because the Revolution do not have a stadium and because they don't spend a lot of money outside the salary budget, that the ownership of this team is not particularly invested. I don't think that's the case. I think that's a club that has a conservative approach to its spending, certainly, but it's not from a place of disinterest.
And this is a great transition to the comments that I wanted to talk about, which were Don Garber's when he addressed the media in between rounds of the MLS SuperDraft. A lot of the other stuff that we haven't talked about in Pitch Pass is kind of been written and talked about it. I'm specifically thinking about the TFC Michael Bradley situation. So these comments from Don Garber are new. These are the ones I wanted to focus in on you with. And let's start with that comment. And that is the MLS budget, or he said yesterday that MLS has lost $75 to $100 million in the last year. You can't blame that on New England, obviously. They financially seem to be pretty conservative and seem to be prudent. Where are they losing $75 to $100 million at? And is this posturing for the CBA because of what we've seen out of TFC and some of the other clubs this offseason?
Yeah, I think MLS is going through a transition phase when it comes to its spending. You've had an influx of investor operators over the past few years who have entered the league and want to come in and spend more money than they're able to within the salary budget. And you've seen that with Toronto FC, and you've seen it with other clubs. And then that sort of spending leaves Commissioner Garber in a position where he has to try and tamp it back a little bit heading into the CBA negotiations next year. So when you hear him say MLS is losing $75 to $100 million, that's a negotiating tactic. That is a way to position the league heading into that process. Because right now, if you're a player and you've looked at everything that's happened over the past couple of weeks and the way that the league is trending, you have to be a little bit frustrated. So when you see those sorts of comments, that is a situation where Garber's trying to get out in front of stuff for the CBA, and I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock in those numbers.
Are there any guys, because, and I'm thinking specifically of the Maurice Adu situation, which hasn't gotten ugly yet, but you can see where it could get ugly if this signing doesn't happen, because it seems as if the union wanted to happen. It seems as if the player wants it to happen. It just seems as if the league doesn't want the union to pay Adu's salary, as has been reported. Is there a situation, and I'm a guy who likes the transparency of the league, or the lack of transparency frustrates me, but I also can see where Garber's coming from. Michael Bradley is on a different level entirely than Maurice Adu, and if Maurice Adu is going to come in making over $1 million, I'm Kyle Beckerman, and the first thing I'm doing is raising my hand saying, I'm ahead of him in the U.S. National League pecking order. Why am I not getting that? So I understand where the line has to be drawn. It's just unfortunate, at least for the commissioner, that the line has to be drawn so soon after the huge salary that Michael Bradley just got.
MLS has a difficult time explaining how it functions. And this entire imbroglio captures it in a nutshell. The league wants to operate in a way that uses its single entity structure to be flexible enough to accommodate special situations without disrupting the entire process. And right now, when you look at it, Michael Bradley is coming on board for something in the region of $6 million. That is well above market value for him. And then a couple of days later, you start talking about Mo Adu, and Mo Adu wants to come in at what his market value is. That's the $1.2 million figure, whether it's right or it's wrong, is somewhere in the region of what he makes at Stoke City. That's his market value, and Philadelphia simply wants to pay it to him. So when you compare and contrast those two situations, on their faces, they look inconsistent. Now, MLS tends to take a more nuanced approach to things, and they want to try to dig a little bit deeper than that. Michael Bradley is more valuable to MLS than Maurice Adu is. That's just the nature of it. Michael Bradley is one of the top 3 players in the U.S. national team right now, and it's worth it to have him home. And I think that's not just an MLS office approach. That's a league-wide tactic that everyone is behind. The question is, how can MLS sell that? And that has been a consistent problem.
And I think it all comes down to, and I don't want to be a flag bearer for the league, but I do agree that special situations, special circumstances do need to come in play, and you need to throw, I don't know, the rules or manipulate the rules in such a way that when a special circumstance arises that you can act on it. The problem is you can't write a definition of what the special circumstances are because there is no definition of it. You just know it when you know it. And so I think most people would agree for big picture league stuff, yeah, if we have an opportunity to bring in a Michael Bradley, you do what it takes to get him in there. Having said that, when you're the team who has to suffer because your player is in a special circumstance is where everybody gets jammed up. But there's no solution to that because you can't write down that rule. Because it can't be written.
No, the MLS rules tend not to be written per se. They tend to be devised and modified, if not codified, along the way.
I think the problem is it's the eye test, and Michael Bradley passes the eye test. Maurice Adu doesn't pass the eye test, but you can't just write in some rule book somewhere they have to pass the eye test.
Yeah, and from Philadelphia's perspective, they think Adu does pass the eye test. They want to spend the money, and you feel bad for Philadelphia because that is a club that has not spent a ton of money in this league. They play in a big market, but they've been very conservative with their spending. So for them to agree or not agree, I know Nick Sakiewicz said yesterday that they don't have an agreement with Maurice Adu, that they want to bring him in for a pretty significant number for that club, and then to have the league step in and say, no, I don't think so. That's difficult, and Philadelphia deserves some latitude to go out and pursue players and sign them as they will. But at the end of it all, MLS has the right to approve that player contract or deny it. That's what MLS Commissioner Don Garber reinforced yesterday at the SuperDraft, and he said it bluntly, and it's true. Like this is a single entity structure where the central office does have the power to set some ground rules in these contractual negotiations. Most of the time, they don't step in, but in the certain circumstances, they do, and it doesn't always pass the sniff test, but they're doing it in a way so they're trying to keep the functioning of the league operating within certain parameters.
It'll be interesting to see what happens, and to me, the person in the toughest situation is Maurice Adu himself. You know he wants to be playing, being it's a World Cup year, but to pick if you're saying his market value is, let's say, $800,000 to $1.5 million, somewhere in that range. Well, now I need to come in and play for $300,000 or $500,000. I have to take a pay cut to play in this league just because I want to play. Is that something I want to do, or do I want to keep making my money and maybe not playing? It puts him in a bad spot. So I'll ask you, 2014, the season begins. Do you see Maurice Adu in MLS?
I think they will get a deal done at some point, simply because there's been so much attention paid to this situation. I think the rancor surrounding it will inspire all parties to find a way to meet some sort of happy medium. But it's going to have to be done carefully, and it's going to have to be done in a way that satisfies all the parties, and that's going to be tricky.
Is a loan deal a possibility? Could Stoke say, look, you can have him until the end of the World Cup. We'll take him going into the 2014-2015 season?
I think it would be more likely for Stoke to say, hey, look, we'll rip up his contract. We'll give him a golden handshake and say, thanks, Mo, for filling out our reserve team for a couple of years. And you can go back to MLS, and MLS and the union will say, hey, look, you just got X amount of dollars from Stoke City to pay up your deal. Why don't we work in the settlement to how everything is working with their new club? So I think that's a more likely scenario.
Let's talk about a couple of the other issues that Don Garber touched on in his address. Let's start with MLS Miami. I'm confused by his announcement. It was exciting because he said we'll have something to say sometime in the next 30 days. But then everything around that big headline comment was a lot of, well, we need to make sure the ownership group the location is right. So everything else seemed kind of vague, yet we're going to have an announcement in 30 days. What do you take away from that?
I think the details are still vague.
So then
Miami
why would you come out and say that we're going to make an announcement in a month, which then gets everybody's hopes up? It puts a little deadline on everything.
You can have an announcement to make an announcement. and that could be the situation at the moment. Garber has worked hard on finding a stadium solution in Miami. David Beckham is trying to find the proper spot, the proper financial backing to exercise that clause he had in his initial MLS deal. It's a situation that's going to get sorted. It's just a matter of finding the right package and finding the right location for a stadium that's successful for everyone involved. In Miami, it's going to take some time. They just have to make sure that they have everything put together properly, so they're able to wrap up that franchise and find a way to enter it into the market properly. This isn't the sort of thing where you can just flail around. This has to be turnkey and ready to go from the start, because it's going to be a hard sell in Miami.
Well, let me ask you a question. Since I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C., and I'm hearing you say how hard Don Garber is working on getting a stadium deal done in Miami, is he working just as hard to make sure that this now tenuous D.C. stadium deal is also going to get done?
That is a good question. I do not have the answer to it. If MLS is working on the DC Stadium project, it is doing so very quietly.
Very, very quietly.
Very, very quietly. And I'm not sure the league has expended as much time and as many resources on the DC project as it has in some other markets. And I'm not quite sure why. The DC market is important to MLS. United is one of the standard bearers for this league, 3 wins out of 34 last year, notwithstanding. It's important for MLS to have a successful team in Washington, D.C., and a stadium is first and foremost, because D.C. United, in order to be financially viable, needs a new ground. So at this stage, it would behoove MLS, if the league is not as active as it could be in that market, to set out its stall and really push to get the job done, because that stadium deal is tricky in the district. You know how hard it is to get stuff done there.
Yep.
And if it's in peril, then they've got to do everything they can to shore it up.
Let's finish up with Camilo's situation, and looking at it from I don't want to say outsider point of view, because I'm an MLS fan, so I have a vested interest in the league looking good. It feels to me like everyone is going to come out of this a loser. Like, I don't see how anybody comes out of this looking good, no matter what the result is.
Camilo's a winner because he's going to have a much larger salary, and
that doesn't. His overall the view, the respect factor of him isn't tarnished at all. You know, maybe his next move is okay. Well, what happened moving from MLS to Mexico? None of that is going to affect him negatively.
I'm sure some of it will, but if he triples his salary in Liga MX,
yeah,
and lives in a place where the cost of living is much lower, I would say that a little professional sacrifice is worth it. I mean, yes, he should have conducted himself in a more professional manner. I attribute a lot of that to the agent. MLS doesn't look particularly good in this situation, and Vancouver looks pretty much terrible for the way that this whole thing unfolded. You wonder whether the entire imbroglio could have sorted itself out if Vancouver had been more proactive at the end of the season in agreeing to terms on a new deal. Camilo won the Golden Boot last year, and the Whitecaps simply were not aggressive enough in improving his contract to make sure he was satisfied heading into 2014. They exercised the option and said, well, maybe we'll think about doing something. That's not emphatic enough. You have to act decisively, and the Whitecaps simply didn't do it.
It's kind of sad, and I've always felt like I want to be a Whitecaps fan, and it seems as if since their first 4 months in the league, they really haven't handled a lot of things with a lot of aplomb, and it makes me sad because I feel I love the city of Vancouver. The Whitecaps initially and historically have always put a team on the field that I've enjoyed watching, but every year goes by, I find myself less and less interested in what they're doing, which is kind of sad because I wanted to be interested in what they were doing.
It's too bad because Vancouver is a great city, great fans, and it's a club with great potential. But there's so much dysfunction with how that team is operating right now. And until the Whitecaps find a way to sort it out, maybe creating a more rigid structure within the club to make decisions and perhaps establishing a more cohesive and collective vision moving forward, I could see them lurching from incident to incident. And that's not what that club should be doing. Vancouver is a team that should be successful in MLS. It has the resources to do so. It has the talent in the area to do so. And it's got some people who do know what they're doing. It's just a matter of getting out of their own way. And they haven't proven that they can do that yet.
Yeah, very well said. And that's exactly kind of what I was saying, although you said it a lot better, Kyle. So thank you for that. And we appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us breaking down some of the league issues. Kyle McCarthy, thank you, man.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Pitch Pass.
This is your voice. This is my red, white, and blue. This is my anthem to you.
For more show information, go to pitchpass.com.